Recording. Good morning. Morning, everybody. This is Chef Jeannie, joined by Chef Genevieve as our fabulous co-host with the most. And we are in bk121. Today is going to be a day full of questions and answers, discussing our final project and gum paste flowers, fondant, stacking cakes, whatever. So please feel free to chime in and ask your questions, because now is the time to do it. We will have an extra session at some point this week. I don't know when, but now is the time. Let's briefly talk about what happened last week, which was a chiffon cake with Swiss buttercream icing and piped buttercream roses, which you should have piped with American buttercream in some capacity. I have looked at a lot of the assignments and very impressed with what I saw with a lot of them. And I know it's a new skill for most of you, so that's okay. Practice makes perfect. I did field a bunch of questions about, this is my first time piping roses and it's just not working out. And you know what I have to say to that? Pipe the roses for the rest of the year, and then next year after that, and the year after that too. And after you get to like maybe 10 years and it's still not working out for you, it's just something that takes a lot of practice is what I'm trying to say. I know that from teaching a lot of students on cake decorating in the past, they tend to get real frustrated after they try it one time. Try not to do that, because it is something that requires practice and muscle memory especially. So Chef Genevieve is going to talk about what she saw, what she liked, what she didn't like, and what she hopes to see in the future. Take it away, Chef Genevieve.
So it definitely takes practice. That's why I showed you guys those cookie pictures last week of my first ever cookie, and then the cookies I had worked on recently. That's 7 years in between those. And I'm still learning new tricks, techniques, getting better every single day. So piping, icing absolutely takes practice, and I do not want any of you to feel discouraged. I felt like everybody really put in their a single flower. Everybody took their time, was detail oriented. The one thing that I would recommend to you guys as you are learning and experimenting with flowers is trying to find your inspiration from real flowers. So yes, looking at other pictures of buttercream flowers is really helpful. Gum paste flowers, same thing. I'm going to show you guys some gum paste pictures later. But whenever I'm working on a flower, I like to look at a picture of a real version of that flower. It helps me decide which colors I want to use. It just reminds me how thin the petal tips really are supposed to be. I think sometimes when you get in the zone, you can kind of forget what the image is, what you're trying to make. So having inspiration right in front of you can be really helpful. And then continue to practice with that American buttercream and its consistency. So if you felt like your buttercream was a little warm, if you felt like your petals were melting into each other just a bit, I want you to stop piping, either chill your icing or add more powdered sugar to it, right? If we get one flower that's melted into each other, what I don't want is us to be like, I'm just going to keep trying with this same icing. I can't tell you how many cookies I've done that with, where I went to flood them and I'm like, okay, this icing's too thick, it's hurting my wrist, but I'm going to do it anyways. When really what I should have done was stop, taken the icing out, loosened it up a bit more, and then bagged it. So I do want you guys to keep that in mind. I know that that's tedious after you've gotten all the way to filling your piping bag to take it out and adjust its consistency. But if you're looking to ice perfect flowers, then it's important that your icing be a spot-on consistency. So take your time there. But overall, really beautiful. The other thing I saw massive improvement on was the smooth coating of your cakes. From week 1, when you guys had to do that smooth coat, to this week, I saw really, really a giant leap of improvement from everybody. So that was really, really well done. I thought you guys were creative this week. I can tell you're feeling more confident in choosing your own flavors and designs, and I love it. It makes it more fun for me to grade your assignments each week. So rockstar work. We're going to get into gum paste today, which is, I think, a little bit more difficult than buttercream, but can create such beautiful and realistic flowers. So I'm really, really excited for you guys. Oh, and also I always like to talk about where the money is. Gum paste flowers take a lot of time, and you can charge a lot of money for them. You would typically warn your client if they ask for gum paste flowers. You would discuss with them, of course, beforehand how much that's going to cost. But one of the ladies that I'm going to show you later, her whole niche is gum paste flowers, and she sells individual ones. Like a bride will buy one of this lady's gum paste flowers to put on their cake because they're that beautiful. So there's definitely money to be made in gum paste and buttercream flowers. Those little details, again, they take time, but there's money in it. So keep practicing. If you're feeling discouraged, just remember those dollar signs. That's what helps me.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So what do you all have to say about last week's assignment? How did you feel about it? What did you like about it? What would you do differently? What kind of challenges did you run into besides needing more practice? What do you think?
The consistency was an issue for me. I know when it's too soft, I'm good with that, but it was like I couldn't figure out what I was looking for, and I think I consistently had it too hard, too stiff.
Yeah.
I was consistent, just at the wrong place.
Yeah, I noticed in the pictures you showed me that the petals look like they were tearing a little bit on the thin side, and that will happen when your icing is too stiff. You know, as the icing starts to get warm in your hand while you're piping, you want to pop it into the fridge for a little while and then kind of massage the bag to warm it up just a little bit more. But you do that you know, at various points throughout the process. But like you said, if it does get too stiff, you're going to find that your petals start tearing at the end. Another thing that will cause your petals to tear, which is kind of like a freak accident, is when there's something stuck in the tip. Don't forget that. Like there can be little chunks of sugar or little parts of the butter that didn't get blended all the way into your icing that could get stuck in that thin side of the piping tip. So if your petals were tearing and you're you know, assured that your icing was the right consistency, maybe you've got a type of little physical contaminant stuck in the end of the tip as well. I saw some pictures of the icing. Some people text me that it was like the icing was a bowl of soup with regards to like the Swiss buttercream. And again, if you don't whip your meringue up stiff enough, you'll have soupy buttercream. If you don't mix it long enough to where the bowl cools down, you know, to less than room temperature, and you add your butter, you're going to have soupy buttercream. And if you add the butter when the butter is too warm, like it got too soft, you'll have soupy buttercream. So my recommendation was, if you did everything right and it's still soupy, just chill the bowl for a few minutes and re-whip it, scrape it down, chill it again for a few minutes and re-whip it. That's usually will take care of the problem with the Swiss buttercream anyway.
With the American buttercream, because we're not slowly incorporating butter like we did with Swiss and Italian, it can be tempting to also whip it at a high speed. Once you've got that powdered sugar in, it can be tempting to just be like, okay, I want this to turn white, so I'm going to turn this mixer up to high. But you incorporate too much air, and it looks a little bit more like whipped butter than a smooth buttercream. So we have to be patient there. You want to make sure that you're only using your mixer at a medium speed. Sometimes it can take 6 to 7 minutes to get to that white color that you're looking for. So be patient there too. That's going to give you a smoother piping consistency than if you whip too quickly.
That is true. That is true. When I'm making American buttercream, I always like to use the paddle attachment because I find that breaks up the butter and the powdered sugar better. It makes it more smooth. And I'll mix it on medium speed for several minutes with the paddle attachment, scraping often. Don't forget that, especially down at the way bottom of the bowl, so you don't have like lumps of sugar down there. And then right at the end of the mixing process, you could maybe switch it to high speed for 20 or 30 seconds just to kind of get it a little bit whiter, but you're not trying to make it like all bubbly and stuff. You don't want huge bubbles. And if you do make that mistake, you can always turn the mixer down to a lower speed and mix it for a few minutes to break up some of those larger bubbles. And again, if you find your icing is too stiff, like it's just this recipe's got too much powdered sugar in it, it's way too stiff, you can add a little bit of warm water, like a couple teaspoons at a time. but it could also be too stiff because it's cold in the room, like your butter was cold or just the kitchen you're working in is super cold, in which case you do not want to add liquid to thin it out. You just want to put it in the bag and kind of like squeeze it a little bit to warm it up. Don't try adding liquid if it's the temperature that's causing it to be stiff. Yes, Rachel.
I just want to say I did use your, so the writing was the part that I was like the most nervous about, and I used your tip with the cornet bag or whatever, and that was like amazing. That was life-changing how much easier that was than writing with a piping bag. It made a huge difference, so I appreciate that tip.
Yeah, I think with cake decorating, it's always easier to control yourself using smaller bags. Like even with spatulas, a smaller spatula is easier to control than a larger spatula. So I've seen some people with like those giant offset spatulas trying to decorate a cake, and it just doesn't work out. You know, you want to, smaller is better when it comes to cake decorating. You've got more control.
I've seen plenty of people who, when they're piping lettering, their piping bag maybe only has 2 inches of icing in it. That way they can pinch it with their fingers and they have so much more control. So it's definitely something to keep experimenting with. Again, going back to how piping takes muscle memory, every person is going to find a preference. So I love that you found one that works for you, Rachel. That's awesome.
Okay, well, let's talk about the coming weeks. I will screen share for that. Class is pretty much almost over. We've got a couple weeks left. This is week 4. Class ends, I guess, at the end of week 6, which is combined with week 5. So there's a lot to do in a short amount of time. Let's see, this week is week 4. Your assignment this week is to prepare some cakes for your final project. So basically what you're doing is you're going to be baking a creaming method cake or a 2-stage method cake. It is your choice, any flavor you want. You're going to be baking these cakes and freezing them for your final project, which is a 2-tiered stacked cake. And I will go into more detail on that in just a minute, about what that is and what it's supposed to look like. But that's what you're doing this week. You're baking cakes, you're freezing them, and you're also starting to work on your gum paste flowers. Now, this part right here where it says fondant and gum paste mixture 50-50, I'm not going to really require you to do that because that's going to make your flowers not set up very hard, and that's one of the pitfalls of making gum paste flowers is when the flowers just don't set up. So I'm going to go in there and edit that out. We're not making 50-50 gum paste and fondant for our gum paste flowers. We're just using straight up gum paste. And you can purchase your gum paste at the store. I will share a recipe with you on the page at some point, but I want you to buy it because you've never used it before, you've never made it before, you don't know what it's supposed to feel like. So making it from scratch at this point is not going to be a good idea. So you want to buy it. And you can buy it at Michael's Arts and Craft, Hobby Lobby. You can go on Amazon and order it. There's lots of different places to get gum paste. And I would suggest you buy the white color. And then if you want to tint it a little bit with some food coloring, you can do that yourself. I don't recommend putting a whole lot of food coloring into your gum paste because it will change the texture and the consistency. It'll make it more difficult for you to create your flowers, and it'll make it harder to dry, especially in the summertime when it's hot and humid. If you add all kinds of liquid to your gum paste, it's going to make it very difficult to dry. So anyway, you're baking your cakes, you're freezing them, and you're starting to make your gum paste flowers. We want to see at least the center of the roses completed. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we're going to watch a video on that in just a little while, so you will. But that's what we want to see this week. We want to see your cakes baked, wrapped, frozen, labeled for the final project, and we want to see you begin your gum paste work. Okay? Any questions about that?
I do.
Go ahead, Glennie.
Go ahead.
Will wrapping the cake with plastic?
Say that again?
I will wrapping the cake with plastic?
Yeah, wrap it with whatever, you know, you would generally wrap it with, or you could put it in Tupperware if you've got all kinds of room in your freezer. but you definitely want to wrap it or cover it with something and label it properly. Now,
And-
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, somebody mentioned that they don't have all kinds of room in their freezer for this to just be sitting in there for like the next week and a half. And I mean, if that's the case, you can always submit it later as a makeup assignment. But the reason why we're asking you to make it ahead of time is because there's so much more to do in addition to just baking this cake. It's kind of like in preparation. You don't want to wait until the last minute because you've got all kinds of other stuff to do at the last minute. You've got to have frosting. You're going to have buttercream frosting. You're going to have gum paste flowers, which you're going to be working on for the next like 2 weeks. You're going to be covering your cake with fondant. You're going to be shopping, you know, for all these different types of things. So that is why we're asking you to bake it ahead of time. So, you know, if you don't want to or you just can't, then, you know, just submit it as a makeup assignment, which will be fine. Otherwise, I highly suggest that you figure out a way to keep this cake, even if, you know, maybe you put it in a neighbor's freezer or something. But, you know, it's up to you what you do. Evangelina, you have a question?
Well, I wasn't done.
Okay, Glenn.
So for next week, for the week that we're gonna use it, when are we taking the cake out? Like a day before, 2 days before? Like, what are we doing that week?
You want to take it out, you know, probably the same day you're going to assemble it. Take it out of the freezer an hour earlier, then you can fill it with your buttercream and frost it. You know, it doesn't really matter, just as long as it's out of the freezer when you're assembling. You could assemble it frozen solid if you want to, as long as it's placed into layers.
I find I have a much cleaner experience if I work with frozen cake. So you can definitely take them out of the freezer and start working.
But when we put it in the freezer, we're gonna do the buttercream frost and then freeze it.
No, just bake it. For this week's assignment, you just need to bake your cake and get it frozen. Just bake
Okay.
it and store it. If you want to save yourself some time and go ahead and slice it into layers first, that way that's one less thing that you have to do later, that would be good. Just make sure you let it cool down sufficiently before you slice it into your layers.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Evangelina?
Hi, Chef. I have a more elementary question. I have been struggling a little with wrapping my cakes. Is there a trick to do that? Because every time I take them out of the refrigerator or the freezer, the wrap doesn't seem to hug the cake as tight, and there's like air in there.
I mean, 9 out of 10 times I've done it in like a professional kitchen where we have those giant rolls of plastic wrap that are like 24 inches wide. So doing it at home with just the little regular like residential size plastic wrap is probably difficult, but try not to do it when the cake is too warm, because that condensation is gonna collect in there, and it's gonna create kind of like a slippery substance in between the plastic wrap and the cake itself. So that would be my suggestion, is don't wrap the cake up when it's real warm so it doesn't get that like layer of ice in between the cake and the plastic. And then I also put like 2 layers. I'll wrap it once going one way, and then I'll wrap it another time going the other way so that it, you know, stays on there. And then you could also use some like masking tape on the ends to keep it down.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let me jump into the final assignment so we can talk real quick about what that is. You will find the description under the last week of class, right above where it says buttercream and tiered cake assembly. This is the description of the final cake project. We're looking for a tiered cake, at least 2 tiers high. And I would suggest you just stick with 2 tiers. Don't try to make like a 3-tier or a 4-tier cake. Cake is creaming method or 2-stage method, whatever formula you want to use. Again, I would play it safe and stick with the recipes from the book, because those are the ones that we are most familiar with, and those are the ones that we can help you out with if something weird goes wrong. But it has to be creaming or 2-stage method. Buttercream of your choice. I'd suggest American buttercream. Filling is buttercream, or if you want to put some other type of filling in there, you can do that, but I would just keep it simple and put buttercream filling in there. The icing that you're covering the cake with, buttercream, your choice. American, Swiss, or Italian. I would stick with American. It's the easiest to use, especially when you're covering a cake with fondant. The cake needs to be crumb coated, and then you're going to put a second layer of icing on there just like you would normally, but it doesn't need to be quite as thick because you are going to be covering it with rolled fondant and you won't be able to see the icing underneath. So crumb coat it and then put on like a second thin coat of frosting just so the fondant has something to stick to. And that's that. Creaming method or two-stage cake, buttercream of your choice, and then covered it in rolled fondant. You may purchase the rolled fondant. You may purchase the rolled fondant. You don't have to make the recipe that we give you. Now, if you are going to make a recipe, just make the one that we give you. It's a standard fondant recipe. You're going to find all kinds of different fondant recipes, but they're all pretty much the same. It's gelatin, it's corn syrup, it's got some water, shortening, and powdered sugar. There's no flavor to it, so we're not looking for like a bunch of different flavors of fondant or anything. It's a standard rolled fondant recipe. But if you've never made it before and you've never worked with it before, especially, I would just buy it. That way, you know that it's going to work and it's not going to cause you problems in the end. Same thing with the gum paste. You can purchase the gum paste. You're going to be required to make at least 3 roses, so that's not a lot, just 3 roses with leaves. Or if you want to do a more elaborate flower, which I'm going to show you pictures of, you make 1, like a peony or poinsettia, like one of the larger type of flowers. You make 1 flower with leaves, and I will show you pictures in just a minute. Borders, like around the base of each cake, you only want to make borders to cover up that gap. That's going to be like on the second tier, there's going to be a little gap in between, like where the fondant meets the fondant of the next tier. You can pipe borders out of buttercream using a plain tip for a bead border or a shell border. Or you can use fondant. You can make just like roll a little rope of fondant and place it. And again, I will show you photos so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the fondant recipe that we have in the book, like, and I found the glycerin. I don't even know how to say that. What can I substitute that with?
Nothing. You have to use glycerin. You can find glycerin in the craft store. If you can't find it in the craft store, you can go to Walgreens or CVS. It's not going to it's not going to be food grade. Just keep that in mind. You won't die if you eat it. But the glycerin they sell in CVS or Walgreens is basically for beauty products, like if you make your own lotion and stuff like that. But it's not going to kill you if you eat it. If you're planning to serve this cake to people and you're concerned about it, just peel the fondant off. But for the purposes of this project, you can use the glycerin from the pharmacy. But they should sell it at Michael's or Hobby Lobby in a little tiny.
Yeah, I don't have those near me. I went to Walmart, but they don't have it either. All right.
Yeah, just order it on Amazon because you don't need it for another week or so. So you can probably order it on Amazon, like a 2-day shipping.
Now, the gum paste, do you have a recipe for that for us to make it or no?
No, the gum paste, you're going to want to buy it because like I said before, you've never worked with gum paste before. You've never made gum paste flowers. You've never done anything. So if you make it from scratch, you won't know what it's supposed to be like. Pretty much the same with the fondant. If this either one of those things, if you've never worked with it, you don't know what it's supposed to look like, feel like, act like, how it's supposed to behave. So I would just save yourself the trouble and buy it. And I can give you the recipe for the gum paste, and that after you use it this first time for your project, you can make the recipe later just on your own time, so that you know how to make it from scratch, and you have that experience from the project and what it's supposed to look like and feel like.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So Michaela, do you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know if we wanted to go ahead and prep the buttercream for this week, what would be the best way to store that? Like, what could we refrigerate or freeze it? And then what would be the best way to take it out of storage to get it ready to put on the cake?
Any type of buttercream, whether it's American, Swiss, or Italian, you can make it ahead of time and you can put it in the refrigerator or the freezer. Just make sure it's covered up really well. If it's in the fridge, you probably want to pull it out a day ahead of time, just to get it back up to room temperature. and then you need to re-whip it. You need to put it in the bowl after it reaches room temperature, and you're going to put it with the paddle and mix it on medium speed until it kind of reconstitutes, and then turn it up to high speed just for a few seconds to kind of get it nice and fluffy. Same with if you froze it. I would take it out maybe 2 days ahead of time to get back to room temperature, and then the same thing, re-whip it, remix it. If you mix any of these buttercreams when they're cold and you try to reconstitute it when they're cold, they will break. It'll look like curdled, like buttercream soup, and then you're gonna be like, oh my God, I ruined it. Not really. You have to heat the bowl up and re-whip it, and then chill the bowl and re-whip it. So there's a process to get it back to where it needs to be, but just play it safe, take it out of the fridge or the freezer, let it come back to room temperature, and then re-whip it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to show you some pictures now of what we're kind of looking for with the cake. Now, these are professional photos, so I'm not expecting your cakes to look all like fancy and professional like the ones I'm going to show you, but you know, it's kind of like a basis for what the project is.
Rachel, what was your question as she's pulling that up for us?
Just real quick with the American buttercream, I know you suggested that over the Swiss to cover with the fondant. Is there a reason? And also, what is the consistency we're looking at with the American buttercream? Because that's such a difference between that and the Swiss. Do we want it a little looser to cover the cake, or we want it like we just used last week for decorating?
Yeah, think of like the can of frosting from the grocery store. It's thick. You could dip a spoon into it and hold it upside down, and it's not going to go anywhere. Any of the frostings you use, they should have a thick consistency. Now, American buttercream is going to have a more sugary and gritty consistency than the meringue style buttercreams, but they should all be nice and thick and like stiff almost. They shouldn't be thin. You're not going to be thinning out buttercream for any reason for this cake. You want it to be thick and stiff so that you can get it on the cake without it falling all over the place. I prefer American buttercream just because it tends to melt less. Like the meringue style buttercreams are fragile, and it's easier to work with when you have a cake that you're going to be handling a lot. Like the fondant cake, you're going to be putting the fondant, you know, and everything, and touching it, and then fixing the flowers on there. And there's going to be a lot of like handling of the cake. I suggest that. Now you can use the Swiss or the Italian, but it'll just be a little bit more difficult to do that. So pro tip, use American. Anyway, these cakes that I have pictures of here, this is a 2-tiered cake. This is a 2-tiered cake. You see 1 tier, 2 tier. That's all we're looking for. Now, as far as the flower is concerned, this one's probably the most basic. You've got a few roses on there. You've got some leaves. Now, you can make any type of flowers you want, as long as they are crafted gum paste rose or flowers. It doesn't have to be a rose. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. I will show you some pictures of what not to do, which would be like where you just roll the frosting out and you stamp out a piece and then you stick it on the cake. But as long as they're crafted like this, you know, they've got a multitude of petals, they come with leaves, that's all we're looking for. 3 roses, or if you're doing something more elaborate, like, where is it? Like this one here, this is a peony. The pink one is called a peony. You would just make 1 peony with some leaves. Okay, 2 tiers covered in fondant and some flowers. That's it. You don't have to put any piping on the outside of the cake like that. That's called brush embroidery, by the way. This one here is nice, but we're not adding ribbon to the cake. Like this is actual ribbon from the fabric section. We're not doing that. If you want to do, you know, a wrap around your cake, which would be considered the bottom border, you're just going to roll out a piece of fondant and wrap it around the cake as your bottom border. You can, this one doesn't have a bottom border on it. Neither does this one. If your cake, I mean, if you get the fondant on there so as you don't have a gap right here, and you don't have a gap right here, and it looks really nice and tight, you don't necessarily need to have a bottom border. So if you make it perfect like this to where you can't see anything in there, don't worry about the border. But generally speaking, you will need some sort of border in there. Now you can get a little bit more elaborate with your fondant if you want to try like one of these petal techniques, but it's not required. You see how it's flat right here, flat covered in fondant? That's all you need to do for both tiers, but you can dress it up, you know, as long as you're meeting the minimum requirements. Like this one is really pretty, super cute. You can do that if, you know, you want to go all those extra steps. You see this little flower right here, which is just kind of like a two-dimensional. They would roll out the gum paste, stamp out that shape, and then stick it onto the cake. That's not going to be good enough for your gum paste flowers, like this one right here and this one. You want to make crafted flowers, like the ones with several different petals, okay? Don't do the little stamp out flowers. You can use those as filler flowers like they have in this particular photo, but don't put like 3 of these little tiny ones on your cake and expect that to be, you know, good enough for your assignment. Okay, so that's the parameters of the assignment. 2 tiers, fondant, flowers, creaming method cake, 2-stage method cake, whatever type of buttercream you want. Okay.
Do you mind if I share just a few more pictures of some gum paste flowers for a little inspiration?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, so this Instagram is called The Sugar Art, and it's a couple, and their business is all about these luster dusts that you see in the background. So that's what they sell, that's what they create. They make some beautiful colors. It's a really cool company. They are pricey luster dust, that's for sure. It's something that it's a splurge for me. I definitely don't have all of their colors, but I have a few and I love them, especially for working with flowers. Like Chef mentioned before, when you add a ton of liquid, a ton of gel color to your gum paste, it can make it difficult to work with. So luster dust is a way to add color to your flowers in a really gentle and subtle way. So these are all gum paste flowers here. Here's another example of a peony, but one that hasn't opened up. This one's a bit more closed. She's got this one here, which I adore. I just think, holy moly, I can't believe that's something that you can eat. That's gum paste. So you can see here, though, that every single flower took time. She made each individual petal and put them together. Here's a gum paste flower. Again, just like, holy moly, that's the real thing. I don't believe it. If it wasn't on one of those little piping sticks, I wouldn't have believed that's a gum paste flower. So definitely take your time. This is an art form. And again, there's big money for those intricate gum paste flowers. So if you take your time with even just one this week, like Chef said, if you decide you want to make that one big intricate flower, that's something that you can charge like another $50 for, $30, $100. It depends on your client, but you can add huge dollar signs for those gum paste flowers.
That's true. Like the peony, especially like the open peony, you could get $30, $35 for one of those. So that's going to add a lot to your cake orders. And the roses too. I mean, you're going to see how much time it takes you to create these flowers, and you definitely want to charge for your time and materials. So I would say for, you know, a small rose, at least $15, you know, at least. I'm going to show you real quick the tools for gum paste flowers, which we have talked about in the past. So I'm going to very quickly breeze through those. Then we're going to watch a couple videos on how to make the flowers. Okay, so you have the gum paste ball tool, which is, you know, just the stick with the ball at the end. Now, if you want to get the metal ball tool, because we talked about how those work better than the plastic. The plastic always have that really crusty seam on one side, and it tears your petals while you're trying to ruffle. And there's other things that you can do with the ball tool as well. Like you can see here, they're poking little sockets for the eyes. So this is a versatile tool to have. Now you can buy this particular set on Amazon, and it comes with 4 pieces, which is nice because they have all different sizes of the ball. The smaller the ball is, the more ruffly your petals are going to be. And that's just something that has to do with technique. But I would buy this set on Amazon if you could, and definitely avoid the plastic ball tool. Then you have a variety of different cutters. Now for roses you really only need a round cutter, and if you don't even have any round cutters, you could even use the back of one of your large piping tips to make the round pieces. But there's a bunch of different types of, like this one here could be considered a rose cutter. This one here is a peony. This is a leaf cutter. And there's so many different places you can buy them. I would suggest that you just get the basic Wilton kit, because it's going to have all kinds of different cutters all in one box. And don't forget if you're at Michael's or Hobby Lobby to use your 40% off coupon, because this thing retails for $29, but you can get it for almost half off with that coupon. So don't forget about that. I love Hobby Lobby especially. And then you're going to need the foam ruffling mat. Now again, this is called cell foam. That's CELLFOAM, not cell phone, but cell foam. You can go to the Dollar Tree, and in the little craft section of the Dollar Tree, you can find cell foam, and they're like real thin sheets. You can super glue 3 or 4 of those pieces together and make your own cell foam mat for $1, rather than buying the ones like this one here might be $20. Who knows? Now this one's got the holes drilled in it, and that's kind of for advanced technique gum paste flowers, but you don't need to spend 20 bucks on a ruffling mat. You can just go to the Dollar Tree, and if you really don't want to use a mat at all, you can actually ruffle right in the palm of your hand. So what they're doing in this photo, just imagine that the pink part is the palm of your hand. That's not my favorite technique. I like to have a mat, but if you don't want to do that, you don't have to.
My hands are always too clammy for that.
Yeah. And then there's other things that you can get, like this little egg crate right here for drying the petals so that they have a little bit of shape to them. And this one here too is kind of like a wavy, but you could do that on the back of a rolling pin. There's so many ways to do it. You could get Dixie cups and then put a little piece of foil inside the Dixie cup and press it down a little bit to create like a little cup that you could use to set your petals in. You don't need to go out and spend hundreds of dollars on all this specialty equipment. There's ways that you can do it yourself for cheap. Okay, so now I'm going to pull up the video that I have attached to the class page. Okay, so on the class page under week 4, you will see a couple of different videos here, which I added for you to watch. And then there's also a video that Chef Paul recorded, which we'll watch first. So I'm going to stop, at various points of this video, but I am going to try to play it in its entirety so you can see what the process is, and just try to take it all in and maybe save your questions, type them in the chat or write them down and save them till the end so that we can kind of get through this.
Gum paste is made from a vegetable gum and is used for molding decorative items. Unlike pastillage, it doesn't contain any gelatin.
Can you hear
Gum
it?
paste is expensive, so it's typically only used for smaller scale components. It can also be rolled very thin, making it ideal for shaping flowers. Gum paste and fondant do not like to be in the air. They do dry out quickly. So what you want to do for your flowers is always keep it wrapped in some plastic wrap or a freezer storage bag while you're working with it. So this is a mixture of 50% fondant and 50% gum paste. We need the two together.
Sorry, I want to say that it's real important that you keep it covered while you're working with it. Never just let your gum paste sit out. You want to cover it every time. You're going to tear off a little piece to work with, and the rest of it, you're going to keep it tightly sealed. I like to use a Ziploc bag and put a wet rag over it, not to impart moisture, but the wet rag will kind of apply some pressure to the bag to keep it down, to keep the air out of it.
And the reason that we're doing a 50-50 blend for our flowers is because we want it to dry quickly, but we don't want it to dry so quickly that you're not able to work with it, especially if you're doing this for the first time. So you just want to knead it so that it's the consistency of chewing gum. We'll put it inside our little pad here. And again, that could be a page protector, it could be a pastry bag that you cut open. And then using our rolling pin, we're going to roll this down to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Make sure you keep it moving. It does have a little moisture, it can be a little tacky. Next, we're going to take our round cutter.
If you get some cheesecloth or even some of those little pantyhose knee highs, you can put a little bit of cornstarch in it and tie it up at the top to create like a little sack full of cornstarch, and you can use that to dust your mat while you're working with these flowers. I do not suggest dusting with powdered sugar, because when powdered sugar touches your hands, and if your hands are like hot or anything, it's going to turn into like a goo, like a sugar goo, and cornstarch won't do that. So if you want to put the cornstarch into a little cheesecloth, isn't that easy to get privately, but if you go to the Dollar Tree again and you get some little nylon knee highs to actually wear on your feet, but don't put them on your feet. Don't use the ones that you already have though. Try to get some new ones and make your cornstarch sack.
So this is a round cutter about 1.25 inches in diameter. And I'll show you how to make the center for the rose. So this is what that looks like. And if you take your cutter, it's when you start making your centers, you can use this type of cutter, hold it up against, and they should be about the same height. That lets you know that you're using the right size cutter for your petal. So we just make quick cuts. And you can do several at once. And then separate them. Remember, the air is the enemy, so we want to keep that away. Now for the fun part. Place one circle on the center. Using the balling tool, you can come around the edge. And you're 50% on the gum paste fondant mixture, and you're 50% on the sponge. You're using medium to firm pressure.
Now you'll notice that he's not rolling the ball across the gum paste. He's pushing it and dragging it across the gum paste. So he's not actually like turning it as it's going. He's just kind of like dragging it. So if you're doing this and you're not getting the thin edges the way you want, you're not getting the ruffles the way you want, make sure that you're actually using the ball tool correctly. It's not a rolling motion, it's like a pushing and dragging motion across the gum paste itself. And you need to be on the edge, not on the inside of the edge, but actually on the edge of the gum paste petal.
So start lightly just to get used to it, and go around the circle, and you'll see the edge start to thin out. And if you look at an actual rose, you'll see the petals are really thin on the edge. So that's what we're trying to create here. Be patient. Once you've made the petal, it can sit here for about a minute or so, and I'll show you how to make the centers. So using some of our gum paste, just want to take a small amount, a ball maybe about 1/2 inch in diameter, and then roll this in your hand into a little ball. And then cup your hands like a V. And you're going to create a cone. So now you have a little cone, just like this. And then to prepare the wire, and you can prepare all these wires in advance. So I'm using the 18 gauge, this is the heavier one. And if you don't have these wires, it's okay. You can still use a toothpick. That would.
Now the wires, you can order them online. You can get them at the craft store. If you are looking in the craft store, go in the actual floral section of the craft store, because they're going to find more of a variety there, and they're going to be cheaper. You're going to have a bag full of more wires for less money. But they do sell them in the cake decorating section as well. I can show you a picture of what the wires look like online here. Make sure that you're getting the wire that's covered in cloth. You will see some wires like on this spool right here. It does not have a cloth covering. You have to have the one with the cloth covering, otherwise the gum paste will not stick to it. Then they do come in different gauges, like he just said. We can click on this little link here. Now, the smaller the gauge, the thicker the wire. So if you're making a real heavy flower, you need a thicker wire. If you're making a lighter, more delicate flower, you need a higher gauge, which is a thinner wire. Usually the tutorials will tell you which gauge to use for a certain type of flower. Okay, so there shouldn't be a question. Once you're more experienced, you can kind of just go with it the way you know how. But if you're watching tutorials, they'll tell you exactly which type of wire to use. And they come in green and white and brown at the craft store, in the colors.
Would be fine too. So with the needle nose pliers, I want to cut each one of these into thirds. So this is a 12-inch wire. So I just roughly want to cut it into thirds so I can get 3 roses from one. So now we have our wire. I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to take the top and I'm going to bend this into a little loop. So it's going to look like the handle on an umbrella, like so. And I'm going to use my glue, so that could be the Tylose liquid, or it could even be melted gum paste. That would work fine.
So with regards to the gum paste glue, you don't have to buy anything special for that. If you want to, they do sell it in the cake decorating section. Otherwise, you can just take a little bit of your gum paste and put it in a dish with a few drops of water and let it soften up that way, and you're going to end up with kind of like a gooey substance, and you can use that as your gum paste glue. You could even use straight up water. Something that's wet when you paint it onto your gum paste is going to cause the gum paste to become sticky, and that's what we're looking for. Anything that you're using, though, you just want to make sure you're using a light coating, because if you put too much wetness onto the gum paste, the petals are just going to slide around. They won't stick because it's going to be too wet. But again, you do not have to purchase actual gum paste glue. You can make your own. You can even get some of that Tylose powder from the cake decorating section. Take a little bit of that, put it in a dish, and mix it with a few drops of water. That's another way to create your own glue. I have in the past used egg whites as well. I don't recommend that for safety reasons, but that's another option too.
And we're just going to brush a little bit on top of that little handle that we created. We're going to insert it right up the bottom of that cone, just like this. So now it's right on top, and then I take the bottom and I pinch just a little bit to gradually bring this down so that it just doesn't have a blunt bottom to it.
That step is also important to get the gum paste to stick to the wire. If you don't pinch it like that and put a little pressure on it, when it dries, it's probably going to just fall right off the wire.
To apply our first petal, I have one that I did previously, so this one is nice and dry. And you can hear it's very hard. We'll take a little bit of our glue, not too much, and we're just going to paint the entire top. And we're going to take that petal that we made, and we're going to apply it like so. I'm going to wrap it around, and then make a little point at the top, like so. And we're just creating the top of the rose, the little center. And then you can tuck the bottom in, and then bring it down the stem, just like you did originally. And then you can see this is the first step.
Now that's probably the part that I see students forgetting the most. They just make the cone and then start adding the petals. If you forget this step, your flowers are going to look like they've got like a weird little like finger poking out of them, because you're going to be able to see that cone, and the cone's just going to be like, hello, and it's going to look really weird. I mean, it might not look bad, but it's not going to look like a rose. It's going to look like another type of flower. So don't forget that first step, which is to wrap the cone and almost like a little sheath, like a little hat on there to kind of cover up the cone itself.
So that's petal number 1. So we'll do anywhere from 7 to 14 or 15 petals depending on the size of the rose. But this is the first one to get started. So if you can see, this little door is open right here on the petal. I'm going to slide the new one in right behind it, and I'm going to gently tuck that original petal around the bottom, just so that it keeps tucking and spinning. And then a little bit of glue behind, and then some on the base. And when you rolled it with the balling tool, it naturally wants to curve, and that curve you want to always face outward. So we apply, just like we...
Don't allow the center part, that cone with that first petal on it, don't allow that to protrude too much, because then again, if it is sticking out too much, it's going to look like a completely different type of flower. The petals are going to be like down here, and then the cone is going to be like sticking out. So don't allow that to protrude out too much.
Something else that I had a really bad habit of when I first started working with this is letting my petals gradually get higher and higher. So I wasn't pinning them to the base of the rose. As I added more petals, it's tempting to lift them up a little higher so they're a little more visible, but you don't want to do that. You want to keep your base the same as you're adding all of your petals. They should all start at that same bottom point.
Alternatively, you don't want to make them lower and lower either. You don't want to make them like start going down the wire, because then it's not going to look like a rose, it's going to look like a cabbage.
We did the first one, and then now we wrap around. And we tuck that first one in just at the bottom, but we leave the top open so we allow the air to come through to look more natural. So after you've applied the second petal, so we won't count the first one, that's just to cover the cone because we don't want to see that. So you want to make sure that that is nicely closed. So we have 2 petals, then we'll continue with 3, and then you can do 5 petals around that, and it's the same process. And then if you want to go even bigger, you can do 7 to 9 petals around that. After about 48 hours would be a good time to start doing your coloring. So I have a completed one here, completely dry. You can touch it, nothing's moving. If you drop it, it will shatter, so be careful. But this is completely dry. And I have some petal dust here. So I'm going to take a little bit of this. This one is called Buttercup. So it's just a pale yellow. And then using one of your soft brushes, simply come in with your color. And I like to do a little bit darker in the center like it would be in nature. And I start to brush. This feels like porcelain, so it's very durable when you're going over it with your brush. As long as it's dried properly, it should be fine.
Super important, allow your flowers to dry completely before you start coloring them. And it's going to take at least a day, if not 2 days, in order for them to dry, depending on your climate. Do not try putting any color on there when they're still soft. It's just going to make the petals fall off, and it's probably going to make the cone, the center part, fall off the wire too, and then you're screwed.
There's no water added, there's no alcohol, nothing like that. It's just pure powder form color added to the petal. And because they're very porous, they take the color on nicely. So to add a little accent color just around the edge, I'm just going to brush the thin edge of the petal very gently. Less is more. And then the last thing I would do to finish the rose is to tape up the stem so that you could add it to other roses or other leaves or flowers as you're building your cake or designing, like say a spray or something like that coming down the side of your tiered cake. So here is our floral tape, and if you haven't worked with this before, it has an adhesive to it, and it's activated when you stretch it. So when you pull this, it'll start to become very sticky. Right now it's just not sticky. So you come up at the base of your rose.
You will find the floral tape right by the floral wire in the craft store. You can buy it online too. And just like Chef said, it's not going to be sticky when you pull it off the spool, but once you stretch it out a little bit and it meets the heat of your hand, it will start to get tacky. Where did my video go? What happened? I lost it. There it is. Okay.
And this part's a little tricky. And you just kind of wrap it around. You start to twist. And just wrap it around the wire. That way you don't see the wires. It makes it look a little more like a stem. And then you have a completed rose. And for storage, you just pop them back onto your styrofoam. And if they're dried like they are here, you can cover them with a little plastic wrap or like a giant bowl, and they will last for a long time. Gum paste items can be made in advance and stored for up to a year covered. Flowers are the most popular use, but it can also be utilized for bows and ribbons. The process of working with gum paste is meticulous and requires patience, but the final end result can turn any cake into a work of art.
So just like I said before, I don't suggest you use the 50-50 mixture just because it's summertime now in most of the country. I don't know where a lot of you live, but it's going to cause your petals to dry too fast. Now, on the other hand, if you start working with these flowers and you notice that you can't get through 1 or 2 petals without them starting to dry and crack up and get like brittle on the ends, then you can go ahead and add a little bit of fondant to your gum paste mix to soften it up a little bit and to help it kind of stay a little bit moist while you're working with it. But I wouldn't go as far as to mix 50-50. If you're going to add any gum paste at all, I would start out with maybe like not even 25%, maybe like 15%. You know, like if you had 4 ounces of gum paste, 25% of that would be 1 ounce, but you could go a little bit less than that. Maybe you could use like ½ an ounce of fondant to add to it. Just a little bit is what I'm saying. Start out with a little bit and see how it works. What you should not do is take all of your gum paste and add fondant to it. Keep your gum paste in the container wrapped up. Just work with little pieces at a time. And if you have to put fondant in it, add it to the small piece. Don't mix everything into your gum paste, because if you're like, oh man, that was way too much fondant, now it's not drying hard, then now you just ruined all your gum paste. So don't do that. And make sure you're keeping it covered while you work with it. I did attach a couple more things to the class page, which I'm going to show you right now so that you can see what they are.
As Chef Jeannie is pulling those up, I quickly want to talk to you guys about color again one more time. So last week I saw a ton of really creative cakes, but that included some neon colored flowers, which isn't a bad thing. There are definitely going to be future customers who request neon colored flowers. But I would say that gum paste flowers are definitely more elevated, taking it a step up above buttercream flowers, right? I could picture buttercream flowers on a birthday cake. Most of us wrote happy birthday on our cakes last week. Gum paste flowers are a bit fancier than that. They are a bit more elevated. You see them, you don't see them nearly as frequently because of the time they take. So again, I recommend using inspiration from real flowers when it comes to your coloring too. If you make this beautiful, beautiful, realistic rose, and then we make it a color like neon bright sky blue, that's going to take away from the realistic beauty of the flower that you made. So just consider that as you are choosing the colors to work with this week.
Another point, I'll jump on that same subject, is that if you add too much color to your flowers, it's going to ruin the texture of them. Like if you put food coloring in the gum paste to start, you're going to have problems. You're going to start messaging me and being like, my gum paste is not drying, it's too wet, I can't roll it without it sticking to my ball tool. And I'll say, what'd you do with it? Oh, I put a whole bunch of pink food coloring in there. Don't do that. If you're going to put any food coloring in there at all, just a drop or two, that's it, just to tint it. And then later you can brush on the color like he did in the video if you get some luster dust or you get those chalks like I told you before. But my point is, learn how to do it first before you start getting crazy with it. Because, and I will speak from experience, students will always want to be like, oh, I have this gum paste, I'm going to color it red. I want red roses, or I want royal blue flowers. You're going to ruin it. You really are. If you want to make it vibrant, just put a couple drops in there just to tint it, and then you can paint it with the dry dust later and, you know, make it look nice. But please do not saturate your gum paste with color, because I am telling you now, it will ruin the gum paste. You will not be able to make flowers with it if you saturate it with color. 1 to 2 drops, that's it. Okay? That's all. I'm going to go back to the class page. There's a couple more videos on here that I added. There's a video right here, which you can watch on your own time, how to add gum paste leaves on wires. But anyway, that's on there, so you can watch that if you want to make leaves on wires. But you don't have to put your leaves on wires if you're, you want to stick your flower into the cake and then just have some leaves that you just kind of stick in there. But it is a good video that shows you how to make leaves in general and then how to put them on wires. So you should watch it regardless. And then this one here is how to assemble a spray of flowers. And a spray of flowers is basically like where you take a bunch of gum paste flowers and you attach them all together. So let me show you a picture of what that might look like. Spray of gum paste flowers. Here you go. So you've got a bunch of different flowers which you've created individually, and then you attach them all, and they would all be on wires. You would need to use floral tape for that, but that video is going to show you a good way to get that all together to make a spray. And then there's another one here which is a peony, which is a super popular flower to make, but that one you have to have the right cutters for it. So if you don't have a peony cutter, you can't make a peony flower. That's not something that you can just kind of invent out of random stuff. You have to have a peony cutter, but that does come in the Wilton kit. If you buy the Wilton kit, it should have a peony cutter in there, or it'll have something similar enough that you can make a similar type of flower. And there's all kinds of tutorials. There's a million tutorials on YouTube, and you can make fantasy flowers. It doesn't have to be a rose, doesn't have to be a peony, but like I said before, it just has to be some sort of crafted flower. Don't do those little stamp outs. I'm going to show you another picture real quick on what the stamp out looked like. Oh, flowers. Maybe not. I'll attach it to the page. I don't know what I can call it. Simple gum paste flowers, maybe? Gum paste. I don't know, like something like this. That would be okay for a filler flower, but as you can see there, it was just stamped out with that particular cutter. It's bent up a little bit to create a little cup shape, and that's it. They're putting some color on it. That won't be part of the requirement. You can use those as filler flowers, extra flowers along with your leaves, but it wouldn't be considered an actual like crafted flower like these are here. Okay. Questions? I know you probably have a lot of them, but make sure that you're doing, the research on your own time, watching the videos that I included, watching more videos, and giving it a shot. Do give it a shot before you freak out and you start being like, if this isn't working for me, try it first. And try not to jump off the deep end too quickly with regards to these flowers. If you've never done it before, start small, start with the rose, and then work your way up from there. You could even do like a combination of flowers on your cake. It doesn't just have to be roses or the elaborate. And you can do as many flowers as you want. If you want to make like 40 flowers by the end of the project, obviously you won't be able to fit them all on your cake, but you can show them all to us if you want to experiment with a bunch of different types. And then, next week we're going to talk about how to stack the cake, how to put the fondant on the cake, but you don't have to worry about that for this week. What you're doing this week is just baking the cakes, getting them wrapped and frozen, and starting to practice on your gum paste flowers. And this is something that you don't want to wait until the last minute to do, because not only do you need practice, but the gum paste flowers also take several days depending on what type of flower it is. A peony, for example, they're going to be the petals are going to be on separate wires. So you're going to make the petals on wires. You're going to need at least a day and a half to let them dry. And then the next day you assemble it and paint it. So that's a 2 to 3 day flower. If you're making like orchids, that's like a 5-day flower, just because they come in all different petals, and you have to assemble different parts, like the picture I showed you of the flowers I made. this particular flower right here, that's like a 4 to 5 day flower right there. So this is not a project that you want to wait until the last minute. Like the first thing that you do with this flower, this little part in the center, just this little part is on his own petal, or is on his own wire. You have to let that dry overnight. These 5 flowers back here, they're on their own petals. You let them dry overnight, and then the next step is to add this big part here. And then you have to go in like 2 to 3 days later and glue it all together, and then let that dry for a day or two before you even start painting it. Okay? So
there are art shows, you guys, where people come just to display their gum paste flowers, even without the completed cake. That's how intricate this is, and how much room there is to get creative and to learn. It's really, really such a huge category, surprisingly large category that you can get into. So again, as with all of our other techniques that we've learned in this class, your first one is not going to come out perfect. Your petals might fall off. Your glue might not work the way you want it to. You might get so close to finishing the perfect flower and then drop it. Things are going to happen, and I don't want you to feel discouraged. This is something that takes years and years of practice.
That's right. It really does. Rachel.
So just to clarify, this week we're turning in the cakes and then the centers of the flower on the wire only. That's this week's. Of course, we can go ahead and practice the other stuff, but that's what we're actually submitting, correct?
Yes, this week is your cakes baked and frozen for storage. If, like I said before, if you want to split them in layers, you can do that to save yourself some time later. So the cakes baked and frozen for storage, labeled, and at least the centers of the roses. If you want to keep going with the flowers and submit pictures of the rest of your steps, you can too, but the requirement is the center of the rose. And like Chef Paul said in the video, you don't have to use wire if you don't want to. You can use toothpicks or like wooden skewers, like that you put, you know, like meat on for the grill or something. I don't like to assemble my flowers on wood because you can't like bend them around and make them more lifelike. Like when you stick it onto the cake, when they're on wires, you can kind of like move the flower in different directions, you know, but once they're on wood, you cannot move the flowers at all. But you do want to put the flowers on something, whether it's toothpicks or wires, because otherwise it's going to be really difficult to get them to stick to your cake. Usually people will put like a big piping dollop of icing on there and then like jam the flower into it, and that is not what we're looking for. So, but that is it for today. We don't have any discussion this week, I don't think. That comes like, what is it? Do we have a discussion this week? No, not this week. I think it's next week. I did enjoy the discussion from last week, though. That was super fun. I liked watching all your videos, and people included photos. I thought that was a lot of fun. I liked that discussion. So good job on that.
As always, you guys, if you have any questions for us this week, reach out to us. We are here to help. In this particular week, we are fortunate that we are getting so much prep time. It can be a real learning experience to separate a production this much. You get to see how much time each individual component really takes you. So take your time this week. Reach out with any questions, please, please, please.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything to say before we go? Awesome. Well, I will update you on when the extra session will be this week. I think it's probably going to be on either Friday or Saturday night, sometime in the evening. Otherwise, I'm going to let you go. Please let me know if you have anything to say, any questions or concerns. You know where to find me. And thanks so much for coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your questions. And I will talk to you soon. Take care.